Welcome to the Negotiation Society podcast, Inside My Head with me, Jessie Lancaster, your host here in London. And today, my guests are Patrick Shewell and Dan Anderson. So, a brief introduction. We're going to be talking about sustainability, and I think the word passionate gets bandied around rather a lot when people talk about the things that they're passionate about in terms of their work. But Patrick is the global head of sustainability at Mondelez International. And I have to say, we had a couple of short calls in preparation for this podcast. And to say that he is passionate about this, I think might be an understatement. And I also have Dan Anderson with me, who I've worked with for many years and has done more for the GAP partnership and sustainability, and I guess really lives the values when it comes to sustainability. Put it this way, you never go to a meeting and print out a sheet of paper if Dan is going to be present, because somebody will make a joke in reference to it. So this is who we are going to be talking to today, and we're going to be discussing, well, the concept of sustainability. And I have to say, I am not an expert on this. So it's really over to these two to talk about this. So starting with you, Patrick, we're used to hearing this word, sustainability. But tell us, how do you define sustainability at Mondelez, and how is it valued internally?
Great question, Jessie, and thanks for having me today and for the tee up. I've been labelled the evangelist in previous companies, so if I drop in the odd hallelujah, we might want to stop and re-record. But sustainability at Mondelez really means driving business viability through our commercial and operational actions, but minimizing negative people or planetary impacts. And we talk about sustainability as being kind of twofold. It's about leading where we matter most. So we're a biscuit and chocolate company. We're a $31 billion company by revenue last year, 79,000 employees globally. We sell in about 150 countries around the world, and we own huge brands like Milka, Cadbury, Belvita, and Oreo. So what we talk about is really driving leadership where we matter most. And so that's when we think about our ingredient sourcing, it's in areas like cocoa and wheat. These are core ingredients to the products that we make. And so it's advantageous to source those in a way that's sustainable, because that maintains our business viability over the long run while minimizing negative impact in areas where we have sizable leverage. And then we talk about driving change where the world needs it the most. And so I think we all are acutely aware of the ongoing climate crisis, and the IPCC reports that have been kind of, I think, disseminated through the press over the last few years have shown us just how significant the current situation and future risks are. And so we have set an ambitious goal to be a net zero business by 2050. That means decarbonizing both our operations as well as our supply chains. And we care about things like water stewardship and ensuring that water stress, lack of fresh water, doesn't become an issue for our employees or an issue that could prevent continuous supply of ingredients into our factories.
I think it's really fascinating when we hear about a company that actually some of our listeners may not have ever even heard of. It's really interesting. You say the company Mondelez, and you don't necessarily think of all those massive brands that you've just listed off and all of the incredible things that you're doing with the organization. Bringing it over to you, though, Dan, in terms of, well, we're a negotiation consultancy, right? Why is this so important to you?
Yeah, so thanks, Jessie, and again, great to be here. So there's a number of things that we're working on at the GAP partnership relative to environmental sustainability, and the first part of that is looking at ways in which we can reduce our own footprint. We've got a number of initiatives with different suppliers. We're helping our employees to understand how they can reduce their own personal footprint, and we're making changes to things like our workshops, for example, to make them more inherently sustainable and to reduce the waste footprint and the carbon footprint of those various capability products that we work with our clients on. But one of the really interesting areas that we've been focused on for the last 12 months is actually starting to now engage with our clients on how can they negotiate environmental sustainability more effectively. How can they trade variables linked to sustainability in a more effective way so that procurement teams or sales teams can actually make a noticeable difference in terms of businesses achieving some of these, like Patrick was saying, these rather ambitious and stretching global targets that businesses have put in place to either go net zero or significantly reduce their waste footprint, or all different areas concerning their overall operation. So that's a really exciting area, and we're starting to release some great new content in that space as well.
Sounds really exciting, and it definitely sounds like I've got two people here that are pulling in the same direction and wanting to achieve very similar things. So it'll be an interesting conversation, I think. But when we think about sustainability, let's face it, it feels like a landscape that's rapidly evolving. Governments are increasing the pressure on businesses, as you know, Patrick, to take concrete, verifiable action on environmental sustainability. Given how quickly things change, different markets, how does your team stay on top of everything moving like that?
Yeah, it's super challenging. And I guess we're blessed because we have great people in all of the markets within which we operate. And so first of all, I think it's about monitoring and understanding how that regulatory environment is changing. And that's where we lean on kind of our public and government affairs group, who are well plugged in. And so once we understand how regulation is forming, then it's influencing the regulators to ensure that it's practical and it doesn't have unintended negative consequences. And then at the same time, it's ensuring that our programs are set up with the intent to have positive impact. And so hopefully you're not in a reactive situation. You're actually proactively trying to solve for these problems. And so then regulation becomes an opportunity because it levels the playing field versus a risk or a threat to your organization that means you're constantly scrambling to try and catch up. And so a good example would be EPR schemes, extended producer responsibility schemes, where as a producer of plastic packaging or packaging in general, you're required to ensure the end of life management of that packaging is done responsibly. And so those schemes can be seen as a proxy tax because they don't, say, create circularity that then feed recycled content back into your packaging supply chain. But if you advocate for optimal EPR, you can create the conditions for circularity, and you can do that in a way that it levels the playing field. It forces everybody to step up and meet a minimum set of requirements. And so actually what that means for a company like Mondelez is we don't have to take a pure leadership position on driving circular pack economy within the markets. We can do that collectively with government partners, NGOs, and peers in industry to then collectively drive the investments and build the infrastructure. So when you kind of eat your Cadbury Dairy Milk bar and you put that packaging in your recycling streams, usually store drop off, just to educate any consumers listening, then ensuring that that is recycled and ultimately becomes reusable material. And then that circular economy is the way that we ensure that plastics don't end up in our critical ecosystem. So yeah, watch it, make sure that you're prepared for it, and then advocate to ensure that there's no negative consequences, unintended negative consequences as a result of regulation done bad.
Patrick, it's really fascinating to hear you talk about how much influencing is actually happening, something that I certainly hadn't considered, the amount of influence you might be having on even the regulatory landscape. It's a really interesting point of view. Thinking to your role, global sustainability, you're working in procurement, and might be slightly cynically, but procurement has maybe traditionally been thought of as a cost-cutting function, maybe even getting that sort of internal stakeholder engagement. It's something I often hear from procurement teams. We struggle to even get our own teams to come to us and utilize the skills that we have. How does the procurement team that you're responsible for at Mondelez drive that sustainability agenda, get that engagement, get people excited about something like this? What do you do?
Yeah, really great question, Jessie. And I think I'm a bit Pollyannish on this view. So I recognize that historically procurement's been quite transactional and, often shows up. And I think the read of the business is, I'm here to cut your budget, right? And we negotiate price and contracts. So I see this alongside, say, enterprise risk management, value creation as another pillar where actually procurement has an opportunity to step up and lead. So a really fascinating fact is about 94% of our total company carbon emissions sit within our supply chains. And so when you talk about climate change and net zero, that doesn't mean, shifting to renewables within your production facilities. It means cleaning up your full end-to-end supply chain from origin, location of the ingredients that you use, all the way through to end-of-life management of your products. And so actually it creates this really compelling opportunity for procurement to be more than just a price negotiation function and actually step up and lead. So I think if procurement adopts a mindset of how do we create value beyond cost savings, talks about sustainability, I think it's a more compelling reason to go and talk to your business partners, and there's more that you can solve for them. And so then I think that allows you to, ask for and gain that seat at the table and be seen as part of that kind of strategic or strategy setting group of business partners, and then that allows us to kind of influence a lot more of the agenda than simply be flown in as that reactive function because we need to beat up a supplier because we want 3% more for 2% less.
It's listening to you describe that, I hope that level of excitement and engagement and all the things that you want to do differently might just spark some ideas with some of our listeners. So Dan, I know you're in regular contact with chief procurement officers. You're on the ground having these sorts of conversations. Listening to what you just heard from Patrick, does this feel like a similar message you're hearing from them?
Yes, absolutely. I think many businesses are now realizing that procurement has a much more strategic role to play, and that the function can add a lot of value to wider business strategic initiatives if procurement stakeholders are involved early in the process. I do think there is a big challenge, however, around mindset. And that's both concerning the individuals that are working within procurement functions, but then also within their kind of key stakeholders and actually within the leadership teams of those businesses. I was recently reading a review by the consultancy firm Officio, and they've looked at how procurement can take a more strategic role in environmental sustainability. And they found that nearly half of chief procurement officers say that they have challenges with a lack of board level buy-in as to what procurement actually does, well, which is going to be a challenge. And without that buy-in at a senior level, I think procurement teams are going to struggle to change their focus and their goals away from traditional tangible commercial metrics, which really focus on providing short-term benefits to the bottom line, rather than having goals which promote longer-term value and help to protect the future of the business by reducing risk. And that's subsequently going to affect the variables that are on the negotiation agendas of buyers. I think as well, the same review found that just over a third of procurement professionals view procurement as a strategic function. So even within the function, there is a very much an ingrained mindset that we're here to cut costs and ensure stability of supply chains, and that is going to take time for that to change wholesale across industries and markets.
As we're a podcast, I'm just going to let our listeners know that Patrick was emphatically nodding when he was hearing Dan talk about that concept of board engagement and stakeholder management, etc. So it's clearly that you're on the same page with this, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, Amen. I think that was beautifully put by Dan, and this is something that we continue to have active conversations on at Mondelez, and we are still too incented to drive the commercial benefits, and at times that can look like it's in conflict to driving a sustainability agenda. So I need to be pragmatic in terms of the conversations I have with my procurement colleagues, because I can't blow up their cost models. But I think there's this creativeness that needs to come from CPOs and the buyers to say, how can we deliver this and this? And there is sometimes still that myopic view that I'm being targeted to deliver the commercial results, and so I shut out everything that seems like a distraction. And said, I think, you know, that continues to be a challenge. And so Dan's absolutely on the money when he says that this is still a journey that procurement teams need to go on, and a lot of it comes down to helping the board understand that you can't expect pure cost cutting from your procurement organization and deliver on the business metrics to drive sustainability as well.
It's just too much to ask by the sounds of it. So I'm going to take a moment to put my consumer hat on, and forgive me for maybe being a little bit skeptical. So as a consumer, you know, there is, I think, quite a lot of skepticism around these claims that brands are making. You know, they say these are our sustainability credentials, for example. How do Mondelez, Patrick, how do you go about making sure that your credentials are genuine and credible, and they actually do feed into something that is environmental and sustainable?
It's a really great question. It's a hot topic, especially in markets like the UK, where I think there's a lot more consumer awareness around the issues related to sustainability and some of the underperformance of certain companies and certain claims, which quite frankly, I think are absurd and kind of, you know, verging on the ridiculous. So what we do is you always have to start with the right intent, understanding what problems are you trying to solve for, what's your role in solving those problems, and then looking to drive tangible benefits. The rest of it, I think, focuses on how do you collect the right data, how do you manage that data with the right controls, and then how do you have that information third party assured. And then how do you work with your brand owners to make sure that that's communicated in a way that's consistent with advertising standards or claims requirements? And I think if you do all of that well, and look, we're not perfect, but we're doing a lot to get better, I think then at your core, what you're trying to achieve is purpose and positive impact. And then the outcome of that is credible claims, and then a transparent, open, honest dialogue with your consumers to say, hey, look, we've not solved for world hunger and world peace, but we've got really good intent, and we understand where our impacts reside. We understand our responsibility as a business, and we're working hard every single day to get a little bit better.
I like that. It's sort of that combination of purpose, the rigor that really backs it up, and then communicating with, you know, whether it's me or whether it's, you know, any consumer in a supermarket or whoever they are, to actually help them understand what it really means to them. Dan, we hear this term kind of greenwashing, right? This is something that I've certainly heard. When we think about procurement functions, when you're advising them on all of these principles, specific with a negotiation angle, how do you help them to avoid things like greenwashing? Or
I think you know, there are obvious things that businesses and procurement functions can do with their supplier base, like, you know, tightening their existing policies and terms. They can increase the frequency and stringency of the supplier audits that they're running. And it's also, I think, worth pointing out that unless a procurement function understands and has confidence in its own baseline and its own business footprint, then it's going to be very difficult for it for buyers and for that function to really understand the credibility of the data that they're receiving from their suppliers. I think there are some simple things as well that are often overlooked, which buyers can consider. At the Gap Partnership, we're always encouraging people to try and find ways and methods to ask more effective questions. and to be naturally curious. It's a skill of a negotiator. And I think that is especially relevant here. So, you may not be, as a buyer, a sustainability expert, but most buyers are trained to notice and challenge when they hear things like soft language or vague language. So I think buyers should ask themselves, when they're receiving data from their suppliers, well, can this data or this fact be verified? If the answer is no, and if all you're hearing from them are kind of those sustainability buzzwords, well, the chances are that their policies and the data is not really worth the paper that it's written on. So challenge, ask effective questions, share best practices for within the function for how you can manage your suppliers and get that data from them. And I think there are some fantastic new supplier management platforms that are out there, which essentially do the auditing, or a large part of the auditing for you, which can be utilized by procurement teams. Platforms, for example, like Visible, which directly integrate data from trusted sources like EcoVadis and CDP, where there has been some level of rigor and fact checking already, is going to help to do some of that legwork for you.
I think that's my biggest aha of 2023. Dan, you're absolutely spot on. I'd never thought about it in that context before, but procurement does apply rigor. They put pressure on suppliers to provide fact-based answers, and I think applying that in a sustainability context, that's a unique advantage the procurement group has. So I'm going to take that back internally and do something with that.
Yeah, I like the fact that even the two of you are learning from one another. It's lovely to see. Dan's just talked about the importance of that professional curiosity, asking great questions. Patrick, I'm going to put you on the spot here, because I'm hoping we're going to have some really curious listeners who want to ask some really great questions. So, with that in mind, are there any questions that you think, God, I really wish more buyers were asking that question, that would really unlock opportunities, something that our listeners could take away and really put into practice and change something? Because let's face it, we should all be on the same side, right? We all want to improve this. So what have you got for us?
What I love our buyers, no pressure at all. So what I'd love our buyers to ask on a more frequent basis is, how do I embed this in what I'm already doing? I think so often, whether it's supplier diversity, sustainability, risk management, they're seen as adjunct requirements, and then our buyers get stressed because they feel like the workload's going up, and we continue to lean out our organizations, and so it feels like you're doing more with less. I advocate for this idea of unconsciously sustainable, and that's really integrating sustainability into what you're already doing, what's already core. So how can I ask the right questions in an RFP? How can I assess my suppliers with evidence-based platforms like CDP or EcoVadis that Dan referenced? How can I do apples for apples comparisons? Going into my negotiation, then really pushing suppliers to commit to do more, and then how can I embed that within my agreements? And then the question back should be, you need to give me the tools and the resources to do that effectively, and make sure that I have the right data and insights when I need to make the best decisions for the company, so that I can really push for this being embedded through our sourcing and procurement practices. So actually, as a team, Patrick, you and your kind of army, your small army of people that work with you on this topic on a day-to-day basis, aren't trying to extract all that impact on the back end, but actually as a buyer, it's embedded, it's part of what I do, it's part of my DNA. I don't have to think about it consciously, but actually I've created all of that value. So our supply chains are inherently more sustainable, and then so you don't have to bother me with certain campaigns or certain requirements where we then reach out to those same suppliers and have to ask them to do something that's outside of the context of their agreements, because then we're trying to pull out all of that negative impact that we've effectively sourced into the organization because you didn't give us the tools, you didn't give us the systems and the resources we needed to make more informed and better decisions.
So really what we're talking about is making it a true partnership, utilizing the skills that both sides of the businesses have, and understanding true partnership and joint business planning, essentially. How can we make that more effective? Dan, are you seeing?
Yeah, I think a part of that, Jessie, we talk about collaborative negotiation skills. A big part of collaborative negotiation is understanding that their ideas might be better than yours. And if you go into a collaborative negotiation with a fully formed idea of what that solution is, you are restricting potential value. And so listen to their ideas. Don't shut them down. Give both of you the time to go in and get into the nuances and intricacies of each other's supply chain. Make sure you involve the right people in that process as well. And you can use things like the famous kind of onus transfer tactic, where you almost make your problem their problem, and you say, well, how would you see this looking? Paint me a picture of how we could help both businesses to achieve each other's sustainability goals. What would you need from us? And then be clear on what you need from them. So I think buyers should not go into these conversations thinking it's entirely on them to try and find the solution. Often suppliers have great ideas, and worth giving the time to.
Yeah, and Dan, I was having this conversation just yesterday, and I'll quote the great Paul Polman, who's a bit of a god in our industry, former CEO of Unilever, but he talks about 80% of Unilever's innovation being outside in. And I love that idea that you kind of present problem statements to suppliers, and you're humble enough to say, we don't always have the capabilities, the knowledge to solve for this in-house. And yeah, I think that ownership shift in saying to suppliers, bring forward those innovative ideas, and then it's shifting away from source to spec at quality, with the right service levels at the right price, to actually being willing to pay more or create attractive terms for suppliers that have that innovation mindset. And actually it's that customer of choice principle of you need to sell to your suppliers at times as much as your suppliers need to sell to you. So I really love that point. I couldn't agree with you more.
Do you know what? I found this really, really fascinating conversation. As somebody who would arguably call themselves a bit of a layman when it comes to the concepts of sustainability, I think this should definitely give people some ideas that they can take away practically and start thinking about how, instead of thinking it's something I don't know, therefore I'm going to avoid it, or think of it as an additional task that's going to get in my way, actually thinking about how they can expand the opportunities and have more collaborative relationships, and maybe look for those places, as you said, Dan, where they don't have the answers, but maybe somebody else with more knowledge in the sector does. It's been a real pleasure getting to have this time with both of you, so thank you so much. I will see you again on another episode of Inside My Head.